It was 2 a.m. when the phone rang, sharp and persistent, cutting through the silence of the night. Worn out from another shift at the warehouse, he nearly let it go. But something made him pick up. On the other end, a woman's panicked voice begged for help. He had no idea who she was, but that call would change everything. If heartfelt stories of second chances, powerful reunions, and unbreakable bonds speak to your soul, you're in the right place. Subscribe and feel every beat of these emotional journeys with us. Let's begin. He was just another single dad trying to make it through. Long shifts, overdue bills, a little girl who depended on him for everything. That rainy night, Max just wanted to sleep, but when his phone rang at 2 a.m. and a desperate voice came through the line, he didn't think twice. He grabbed his keys, left his daughter with the neighbor, and drove through the quiet streets of San Francisco. What he didn't expect was to find behind that door a millionaire heiress, scared, alone, and with a heart just as shattered as his. "Hello?" His voice was low, raspy, tired. On the other end, just frantic breathing. Then a hushed, urgent whisper. "Please, please come. I'm scared. It's 2097 Pacific Heights Boulevard." Then silence. The call dropped. Max stood still for a second. It made no sense, could have been a prank, a mistake. But that voice, there was fear in it. There was truth. Pulling on his leaky laundry room jacket and lacing up his worn boots, Max glanced down the dark hallway where his daughter slept. What if it had been her, calling for help? He locked the door with a knot in his chest. Outside, the rain picked up, almost like it was trying to stop him. But he went, because something in that voice, he just couldn't ignore it. The city felt like a different place at that hour. Long shadows, headlights reflecting in puddles, empty streets like the world had hit pause. As he neared the address, he realized he was heading into one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in town. Mansions with towering columns, sensor lights, and high stone walls. And there it was, the black iron gate of 2097. The intercom was dead. Max crossed through the rain and pushed the gate. Surprisingly, it opened. The yard was big, but it felt forgotten. Leaves piled up, the scent of wet grass in the air, a single light flickering in one of the windows. He knocked hard on the door. "Hey, anyone there? You called? I came to help." The door creaked open, and there she was, barefoot, trembling, her face wet with tears or rain, no one could tell. Claire Whitmore, heiress to the most powerful family in the state, stood there holding the phone like it was the last thing tethering her to the world. Max didn't know who she was. All he knew was, this woman needed help. And maybe, just maybe, so did he. Max never had the luxury of choosing his own battles. Ever since Emily's mother walked out, he had to figure out how to survive on next to nothing, and still find the strength to be a father, protector, and comforter for a little girl who woke up crying from nightmares almost every night. Sleep was a luxury, food, a math problem, and silence, a minefield of worries. He was at his breaking point, emotionally, physically, and financially. That mysterious phone call was just one more weight on shoulders already crushed by life. But what he saw when he stepped into that mansion shattered any sense of reality. Claire looked like she was unraveling, not from madness, but from pure fear. She was shaking, her hands stiff, her eyes wide like someone who had just escaped something invisible. She said she'd heard footsteps. She was sure someone had broken in. But the house was empty, or seemed to be. Max felt his heart pounding, not from fear of a break-in, but from seeing someone so fragile trying to hold it together inside walls that could fall apart at any moment. She didn't know him. He had no idea what he was doing there. But the silent connection between two strangers, both worn down by life, grew by the minute. Max grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen and checked every corner of the house with the instincts of a man who's had to protect what he loves with his own hands. No signs of an intruder, just loneliness. And somehow, that felt worse. Claire apologized over and over, but he stayed, because this wasn't just about safety. It was about something deeper. While she mumbled apologies and offered coffee in a kitchen so spotless it felt lifeless, Max noticed that this house, despite its luxury, had the same heavy silence as his tiny apartment. The silence of absence. The silence of waiting for someone who never comes back. And there, in the middle of the night, two strangers sat in that same silence, each carrying different lives but the same ache. Claire didn't share much, but Max understood enough. She was alone. Truly alone. No one had picked up when she called earlier. No security guard. No brother. No father. The house was hers, passed down after her parents died. And ever, since her older brother vanished from the public eye, she'd become the lonely shadow of a broken dynasty. The money didn't matter. Nothing cures isolation. And the truth was simple. That night she just needed someone to listen. Max, on the other hand, didn't have time to feel. He was always racing the clock, calculating bills, hiding his exhaustion from his daughter, telling himself that someday it would all get better. But there, standing in that marble kitchen with grease still on his hands, he let himself feel, just for a second. Because her pain, it was too much like his own. What he didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that the call that brought him there wasn't as random as it seemed. The name Claire Whitmore, it rang a bell. Not because of the wealth or the headlines, but something older, more personal. Max tried to push the thought away. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe not. But there was something about her. The way she looked at him, the way she let out that soft, nervous laugh that stirred up memories buried long ago. The night dragged on slowly. They didn't sleep. They didn't talk much. But something had shifted. And when Max finally said he had to leave, that he had a little girl waiting for him back home, Claire looked him in the eyes and simply said, "Thank you for coming." And in that moment, Max knew. He hadn't shown up by accident. Max Cooper had calloused hands and tired eyes, the kind you see on men who had to grow up way too fast. He learned early on that no one was coming to save him. He bounced from job to job, fending for himself and eventually, by some twist of fate, raising the daughter life unexpectedly placed in his arms. Emily was everything. The rest could fall apart, and often did, but he stayed standing for her. He worked in an auto parts warehouse, taking every shift he could get, swallowing his pride, forcing a smile so he wouldn't scare the curly-haired little girl who waited for him with crayon drawings and a pile of blankets. Beneath the rough edges and scars life had left behind, there was a quiet kind of kindness in him. Max wasn't much of a talker, but he showed up. He brought soup to the elderly neighbor, carried groceries for the single mom upstairs, fixed what he could, even if he didn't charge. Max was the kind of man the world tends to overlook until someone desperately needs him. And that rainy night, that's exactly what happened. Claire Whitmore, on the other hand, was nothing like the world imagined a millionaire heiress to. Behind the picture-perfect image painted by magazines was a woman scared of her own shadow. Ever since her parents died in a plane crash, she'd been holed up in that Pacific Heights mansion. Her older brother, the only real bond she had left, had cut ties years ago after a family fallout neither of them ever figured out how to fix. Claire inherited everything, except what mattered most. Loneliness became her only constant. Dinners were quiet, the hallways too long. The days passed like ghosts. She tried filling the void with charity work and collecting art, but the walls always felt taller at night. She had everything, they said. But everything is just a word. None of it made sense when there was no one to share it with. That night her fear wasn't just about someone breaking in. It was the fear of disappearing and no one noticing. The fear of admitting that even with all the power and privilege she needed someone. She dialed the first number that came to mind, or maybe deep down she called someone her soul remembered. The truth is, Max didn't show up as a savior. He showed up as a mirror, a reflection of the vulnerability she kept hidden, even from herself. Max didn't know anything about her, or the name Whitmore, but Claire, When she heard his name, Cooper, a chill ran down her spine. She once knew a Max Cooper many years ago, a boy who used to visit her house when she was still playing, with dolls, a friend of her older brother's. Could it really be him? She didn't ask that night, didn't have the nerve. But something in her gut said, it was. To Max, she was just another soul in need, but somehow without meaning to, she broke through. When she handed him that coffee, hands shaking, eyes trying not to cry, she showed him something he hadn't felt in years. Kindness without strings. It was small, but it was real. And in that quiet gesture, something inside him began to thaw. Two lives, worlds apart, yet bound by the same emptiness they tried so hard to hide. Max, with his daughter, his burden, and his everyday fight. Claire, with her silent wealth, cold walls, and a longing she never learned to name. That night, without knowing it, they took the first step toward something that would change everything. In the days after that night, Max went right back to his usual routine, exhausting, quiet, tight. The bills piled up on the kitchen table like a stack of broken promises. Rent was late. Emily's school had sent a note home about missing supplies, and the only thing that worked like clockwork was the 5 a.m. alarm. That night with Claire felt distant now, almost made up. But the way she had looked at him, that was too real to be a dream. Claire, meanwhile, tried to regain some sense of control. She hired a new security firm, installed digital locks and motion sensors on every door. But none of it helped her sleep. She stayed up for hours, listening to the sounds of the house, imagining footsteps where there was only the echo of loneliness. The fear lingered. Not of danger itself, but of knowing that if something did happen, no one would come. Sometimes she could still hear Max's voice. And secretly, she wished she could hear it again. Meanwhile, Max was dealing with small breakdowns at work. A new supervisor had shown up with strict rules and zero compassion. Overtime was cut, and with that, so was the food in the fridge. Emily, though still innocent, could sense the shift. She stopped asking for treats, started tucking little drawings into her backpack, like she was trying to give her dad something even if it was just a splash of color in their gray routine. Claire tried to distract herself with her charity foundations, but none of it felt real anymore. The investor meetings, the galas, it all felt empty, rehearsed. For the first time in years, she found herself asking, who am I beyond my last name? The answer hurt more than the silence. Max's face kept appearing in her mind. Not just him, but the way he made her feel, like someone, even a stranger, had actually seen her. Max thought about calling. Once, twice, 5 times. But pride and fear held him back. He knew who she was now. Claire Whitmore. That world wasn't his. He didn't belong there. He was just the guy who fixed other people's cars, wore the same pair of boots for 3 years, and dreamed of one day giving his daughter a home with a backyard. But even as he tried to keep his distance, something inside him had shifted, and it wasn't going back. At school, Emily started falling behind in reading. The teacher suggested special support, something Max couldn't afford. It crushed him. Not out of pride, but helplessness. Seeing his daughter struggle, that was the deepest cut. And that day when he saw her crying because she couldn't keep up with her classmates, something inside him finally broke. He knew something had to change, but how? Claire, on the other hand, found herself digging through old photo albums, and in one faded picture, she saw the face she'd been searching for. Max Cooper, age 13, standing next to her brother. Her heart skipped a beat. It was him. The boy with the easy laugh who played basketball in the driveway and taught her how to climb trees. That boy had grown into the man who'd driven across the city on a rainy night just because she'd asked for help. That couldn't be a coincidence, that was fate. But fate likes to test people. And that same week, Claire got an unexpected visit. A family lawyer with complicated news. Legal matters involving her inheritance. Outside interests trying to interfere. And political pressure mounting around the Whitmore family name. She'd have to make quick decisions, and she couldn't afford to look weak. Once again, she was alone. Or almost. The next week, Max did the unthinkable. He skipped work, took Emily by the hand, and went straight to the school. He sat down with the administrator and laid it all out, told her everything. That he'd do whatever it took to get Emily the help she needed. Anything. The school director, moved by his honesty, mentioned a scholarship program for families in financial hardship. No guarantees, but it was something. And for the first time in a long while, Max felt a flicker of hope. That night, he sat at the table with a calculator, a dying pen, and a pile of unpaid bills. He tried to reshuffle everything, cut the TV channels, canceled the cell plan, put off buying Emily a new uniform. But it still didn't add up. Frustrated, he dropped his head into his hands. Emily, not fully understanding, walked over and gently placed a drawing on the table. It showed the two of them holding a flower. "It's okay, Daddy. We have love. And love is strong." That was all it took to break him, like always. At the same time, Claire decided to leave the house. She got in her car, alone, and drove to a small cafe on the other side of town. Ordered a black coffee and sat by the window, watching life go by. Couples walking, parents with toddlers. And just for a moment, she felt jealous of the simplicity. For the first time, she wished she wasn't who she was. Just a regular woman, sipping coffee in peace without the weight of a name. The next day, Claire did something even bolder. She called Max. His voice on the other end was surprised. She hesitated, then went straight to the point. "You helped me. Can I return the favor now?" Max almost said no. Pride. Fear. But her voice was calm, honest, and he was too tired to keep doing it all alone. So they agreed to meet. Nothing fancy, just a talk. They met at a public park, while Emily played with a stray dog that had wandered over. Claire arrived simply dressed, jeans and a wool coat. Max was nervous, didn't know how to act. But her smile, soft, sincere, melted the tension. They sat on a bench and talked about everything, except money. They talked about childhood, about the people who left, about the kind of sadness no one really understands. Max told her about Emily's mom, how she left just after the baby was born, leaving behind a note and a dirty diaper in the sink. Claire listened quietly, eyes glistening. She shared about her parents, the trip that never ended, about how her brother left her with everything, except what mattered most. "Sometimes," she said, looking out at the trees, "all we really want is for someone to stay." After that day, something changed between them. Max started to believe, just a little, that maybe he could dream again. Claire started sleeping better. She began opening the windows, letting the light in. Small things. But small things change everything. There was still fear, still shame, still uncertainty. But there was also a thin, invisible thread connecting them as something that made no sense, and yet felt completely right. They both knew life wasn't a fairy tale, that happy endings weren't guaranteed. But they also knew that somehow, against all odds, they had found each other at exactly the moment they needed it most, and that, in itself, was a beginning. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Max had ever known. Claire began visiting him discreetly at his modest apartment on the edge of town, always bringing something, a children's book, a homemade apple pie, a smile that seemed to say, "I'm trying." Emily, shy at first, started calling her the sweet lady, and Claire, though awkward around kids, learned how to comb curly hair and listen, really listen, to made-up stories with genuine interest. Max resisted. He was grateful, yes. But her presence made him feel vulnerable. He didn't know how to handle kindness without conditions. Someone asking if he'd eaten, if he needed help with the power bill. Pride and trauma. They're twins. But Claire never pushed. She just showed up. She stayed. And in Max's world, that was already more than he knew how to ask for. One Saturday afternoon, she invited him over for lunch at the mansion. He hesitated, almost said no. But Emily lit up at the idea, bouncing with excitement. And for her, he said yes. The house looked even bigger in daylight, but there were changes. Open windows, fresh flowers in the entryway, soft music playing. Claire was trying, and Max saw that. During lunch, he noticed a photo on a shelf. Young Claire beside a dark-haired boy. Her brother. And then it all clicked. It was Noah Whitmore, his childhood best friend. The kid he played ball with after school. The friend who vanished one day after switching schools. Claire, your brother was Noah? She nodded, surprised. You're Max Cooper. And then they both laughed, shocked by life's strange loops. That afternoon, they shared memories of the backyard, childhood games, even the time Max defended Claire from an angry dog. The memory returned like a warm breeze. They had met before. This wasn't the first time. This was a second chance. That reconnection sparked something in Claire, a long-lost sense of belonging. For the first time in years, she didn't feel trapped inside her own last name. Max saw her as a person, as a woman, not an heiress, and that was too rare to ignore. She began to think about possibilities, about starting over. Max, in turn, began to trust. Slowly, he let Claire see the cracks in his armor. He talked about the nights he cried in secret, the fear of failing Emily, the eviction notices he tore up before she could read them. And Claire listened, eyes glassy, hands steady, because she, too, knew what it felt like to drown in silence. One night after Max got sick from a double shift, Claire showed up unannounced with hot soup and medicine. He tried to resist, but he couldn't anymore. That night, for the first time, he let her stay, just sitting next to him. Quiet, present, and that was enough. Everything seemed to be settling into a quiet peace. Max smiled more easily. Emily seemed more secure. And Claire had even left the back door unlocked, as if for the first time she wasn't afraid of who might come in. But like every calm, this one hit a storm. It came on a cold morning, sealed in an envelope stamped with government ink. An eviction notice. Max stared at it like it was a sentence. The building had been sold. All tenants had 30 days to leave. No negotiation, no extensions. He read it over and over, searching for a loophole. But all he saw was Emily's face asking if they could keep painting the kitchen wall. The ground disappeared beneath his feet. He didn't tell Claire. He didn't want to look weak. Didn't want her to feel obligated. But the weight grew heavier by the day. He searched for another place, called everyone he knew, knocked on doors, but everything was too expensive, too far, too unsafe. Emily noticed. She started asking questions that cut like knives. Are we going to live in the car, Daddy? Max said no, but he wasn't sure it was true. Meanwhile, Claire faced a crisis of her own. Her brother Noah had resurfaced. A short, cold email. We need to talk about the house. The meeting happened in an upscale cafe, filled with bitter words and stone-cold stares. Noah wanted to sell the mansion, said Claire was exposing herself, and that her involvement with people like Max was damaging the family image. For the first time, Claire stood up to him, said she wasn't giving up the house, or the people who now mattered in her life. But the conversation shook her more than she let on. She drove home in silence, eyes fixed on the road, and when she got there, Max was sitting on the porch, holding a box of Emily's toys. I think it's better if we stop seeing each other, he said, his voice trembling. Claire froze. Why? Because I have nothing to offer you, and I'm not going to let you feel like you have to take care of us. She tried to argue, tried to explain it wasn't obligation, it was choice, it was love. But Max was drowning in fear, wounded pride, the gnawing belief that sooner or later she'd realize he wasn't enough. And in that moment, Claire felt what she feared the most. Abandonment. Again. And though she understood, the pain was unbearable. They drifted apart. Max went back to his routine, even more exhausted than before. Claire returned to her mansion, even more silent than before. Emily asked about Claire all the time, and Claire stared at the door, hoping he'd walk through it again. But he didn't. Only silence. And in that rock-bottom space, both of them realized something. What they felt wasn't fleeting. It wasn't charity. It was love. But love without courage is just absence. The days that followed felt like an open wound in Max's chest. The apartment was being slowly emptied, one box at a time, each one marking a quiet goodbye. He'd found a small place far from the old neighborhood, surrounded by loud neighbors and not a single yard. Emily cried when she saw the new room. She said she missed the old home, the sweet lady, and the nights they'd listened to stories together on the porch. Max tried to smile, tried to stay strong. But at night, alone, he'd cry quietly in the bathroom, like a man who'd lost more than just a home. That's when he made a decision. He couldn't keep living just to survive. He hit the streets, looking for work, handing out resumes in person, even with aching muscles and tired feet. He found out about a free technical course offered by the state and signed up. It would start in 2 weeks. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. For the first time, he felt like maybe he could build something different, something real, to offer his daughter, and maybe someone else. Across town, Claire was going through her own quiet transformation. She started attending a support group for people dealing with emotional loss. She learned she wasn't the only one who had grown up feeling invisible in the midst of luxury. She began writing letters to herself, a way to reconnect. One of those letters, on a whim, she left with the doorman at the building where Max and Emily now lived. The letter was short, but it hit deep. "You saved me when I didn't even know I needed saving. Now I understand what it means to want to stay. If you ever want that too, you know where to find me." Max read it dozens of times. First kept it in his pocket, then under his pillow, then inside his heart. But he didn't respond. Not yet. He needed to find himself first. Emily, more intuitive than she let on, started drawing again. But this time, her pictures showed 3 people, her, Max, and Claire. In one drawing, they were having a picnic with a giant flower between them. "That flower is love, Daddy," she said. "It always grows, even if we forget to water it." Max hugged her tight, and in that moment he realized she hadn't given up, and neither could he. At his new temp job as a delivery driver, Max had a moment of clarity. He was dropping off an order at a regular house when he saw a dad playing in the yard with his son, and something inside him whispered, "I want that. I want a life where I can smile without fear." He didn't want to just survive anymore. He wanted to live. Claire, meanwhile, had begun renovating the mansion, not to sell it, like Noah wanted, but to turn it into something new, a shelter for orphaned children. She used part of her inheritance to create the Whitmore house, filled with colorful rooms, books, toys, and warm meals. It was her way of turning pain into comfort, of doing for others what she had always wished someone had done for her. Without speaking, Max and Claire were slowly becoming more whole versions of themselves, and maybe that was what had to happen before any reunion. Because real love doesn't grow from emptiness, it grows from rebuilding. And that's exactly what they were learning to do. Max didn't expect much from that Friday morning. Just another day full of deliveries, traffic, and worrying about Emily, who'd been more tired than usual. But what started as a routine stop changed everything. After delivering an envelope to a downtown building, the receptionist called him over. "There's something here with your name on it." It was dropped off in person. It was a thick envelope, heavy. Inside was a document bearing the Whitmore House seal, and a note. "This isn't charity. It's an open door. Claire." The document offered him a permanent maintenance position at Whitmore House, flexible hours, full medical benefits for him and Emily, and a small 2-bedroom apartment behind the main building, newly renovated. Max froze. This wasn't pity. It was care. It was a quiet gesture that screamed, "You matter." He didn't know how to respond. He just stood there, eyes welling up in the middle of the street. At the same time, Claire got news that changed everything. She had a rare medical condition, manageable but requiring ongoing care. The diagnosis shook her. For the first time, she realized her own strength had limits. She thought of Max, of Emily, of everything she didn't want to miss again. With a newfound clarity, Claire decided to deliver the documents in person, only to find out he'd already received them and accepted the job. She saw him through the window, wearing the new uniform, cleaning one of the windows in the children's reading room. He looked up surprised and smiled. A smile full of memory and something new. Hope. "You came," he said softly. "I've always been here, Max. I just didn't know how to stay." There were no grand declarations, no hollow promises, just a steady gaze, a hand placed gently over his, and the unmistakable feeling that life had offered them another chance. Not a magical one, a real one. Emily ran up to Claire with a book in her hand and a huge grin. "Now the flower's growing." "Again," she said, pointing to a chalk drawing on the ground. It was a garden. In it, Claire, Max, and Emily were holding watering cans, tending to the same plant together. Claire cried. Max did too. There was no need to pretend anymore. The change hadn't just been on the outside, it was something deeper. Quiet. Each of them, in their own way, had rebuilt just enough to love without losing themselves. Max was no longer the broken man apologizing for existing. Claire was no longer the lonely heiress waiting for the next goodbye. Now they were simply two people who chose to stay. And that was the greatest plot twist of all. The peace they'd just begun to build wasn't meant to last. Noah, Claire's brother, returned, furious when he found out Max was living in the old family home and working at the foundation. He accused Claire of dishonoring their parents' legacy, of letting her emotions cloud her financial judgment, and threatened legal action to force the sale of the property. "You're letting yourself be dragged down by a dead past and some random guy," he said coldly. Claire took a deep breath, and for the first time she didn't back down. She faced her brother with steady eyes and a shaky but unwavering voice. "You left all of this long before I did, Noah. I'm the one taking care of it now, and taking care includes love." The tension between them ran deep, old wounds, broken promises, and silences that cut deeper than shouting ever could. But that day, Claire chose to protect what she was building, not with arguments but with decisions. And she chose Max. She chose Emily. She chose to stay. At the same time, Max faced his own crossroads. An old coworker reached out with a tempting offer, a job in another city, better pay, fresh start, safe, no emotional risks, no memories. But the thought of leaving hurt more than it helped. When he told Emily about the offer, she simply asked, "But what about the flower, Daddy? Who's going to water it if we leave?" That question shattered him. That was it. Running was easier. But love took courage. Max didn't want to survive anymore. He wanted to stay. He wanted to grow. Right here, to care for the flower Emily saw. The one he was finally starting to see too. So he turned the job down. For the first time in his life he stayed, not because he had no choice, but because he wanted to build something real. Claire in turn decided to open up completely. She told Max about her diagnosis, about the fear of being a burden, about all the years she had masked loneliness as independence. Max listened in silence, then gently held her face in his hands and said, "You're not a burden. You're a home. And I want to live in that." And in that moment, they let go. No fear, just falling, together, knowing they'd be caught. Noah followed through with the lawsuit, but he lost. Claire had already transferred part of the estate to the foundation, making any sale legally impossible without institutional approval. She used the system's own rules to protect what she loved most. And Max, now officially in charge of maintenance and children's programs at Whitmore House, had found not just stability, but purpose. At the foundation's reopening event, Max gave a small, unscripted speech. With Emily in his arms and Claire by his side, he thanked the mistake that wasn't a mistake at all. Sometimes what we need most doesn't come with instructions. It comes with love and courage. The crowd rose in applause, but Max's eyes only searched for one pair, Claire's. Her smile held everything he thought he'd never have. The Max who once woke up before dawn to wash dishes in a warehouse wasn't the same man anymore. Now he woke up to laughter in the garden, Emily and the other kids running through lavender plants he'd planted himself. He fixed things with joy, hosted workshops for the little ones, and scribbled thoughts in a battered notebook that had become his journal. For the first time, Max had time, and within that time he found his own voice. Emily blossomed right along with him. The little girl whose eyes once carried too much silence now lit up with stories about books, new friends, and art. Her struggles at school faded, and she learned something essential. The hard days they lived through were never her fault, because now everything was different. Not perfect, but deeply real. Claire had changed too. She learned to ask for help, to understand that vulnerability wasn't weakness. It was part of strength. She became more involved at the foundation, launching programs for women who, like her, had been strong for too long. She still dressed elegantly, but there was a new softness in her eyes, like someone who'd finally realized the most precious luxury is peace. She and Max didn't rush into happily ever after. They built something quieter, happy despite everything. Through couch conversations, shared glances, and peaceful silences, they created something stronger than passion, intimacy. No need for grand promises, just consistency, loyalty, truth. Max reconnected with old friends, reached out to distant family, and even visited the school where he and Noah had once studied. On one visit, he found an old photo. Young Claire, toothless and grinning, standing beside him. He brought it to her. "I knew you before I realized I loved you," he said. Claire smiled, and for the first time replied, "And I waited for you, without even knowing I was waiting." Together, they began helping others tend to their own flowers, real and metaphorical. Whitmore House became a symbol of renewal in the city, a refuge for stories once silenced. And every week they made it a point to eat dinner in the same place their story began, that park bench. Fear still lingered, in small ways. Sometimes Claire would wake up afraid of losing it all. Sometimes Max would question if he was truly enough. But now, when that happened, they talked, they listened. And that healed everything. What once was a chasm was now a bridge. They didn't complete each other. They were already whole. But together, they overflowed. Max had finally understood that love wasn't a reward for the strongest. It was a home for the weary. Claire realized that true wealth was being seen and loved exactly as she was. And in the middle of it all was Emily, the flower they watered, not realizing she was watering them back. Months later, on a crisp autumn morning, Claire found an old box in the mansion's attic. Inside were childhood letters, notebooks, and a cassette tape labeled Noah and Max. She played it. It was a random afternoon recording, laughter, a silly song, and in the background young Max's voice saying, "One day we're going to take care of all this together." Claire froze, her breath caught in her chest. It wasn't just a memory, it was a prophecy. That night she played the tape for Max. He listened quietly, overcome, like finding a missing piece of himself. When it ended, he whispered, "I thought fate had given up on us." Claire took his hand. It was just waiting for us to recognize each other again. And in that moment, they both knew. None of this was random. Emily walked into the room holding an envelope from school. Inside was a prize-winning drawing, a giant garden, full of different flowers. In the center, a sign that read, "The place where love lives." Max read it, swallowed hard, and laughed. "You put us in there?" Emily nodded. "Of course. You guys are the gardeners." Life moved forward, with its ups and downs. Noah moved to another city. The lawsuit was behind them. And over time, the siblings began reconnecting. Not like before, but as new people, mature enough to acknowledge their mistakes. One afternoon, Max and Noah talked. No blame, just memories, and a firm handshake. Two men who had lost much, but learned how to begin again. Claire decided to publish a book, a collection of true stories of rebirth that began inside Whitmore House, and the very first story was hers and Max's. No names, but anyone who read it knew. It was an open letter to anyone who'd ever believed they were too broken, too poor, too alone to live something beautiful. It was a hug on paper, and on the last page of the book, a simple line written by Emily. "If you hear someone crying for help, go. Maybe it's your flower that needs watering too." And that stayed with people, not just in the book, but in the hearts of those who read it, lived it, and dared to believe again. Because in the end, it all started with a wrong number at 2 a.m. and ended with 3 healed hearts, a blooming garden, and a love no one saw coming. The question was no longer what if. Now it was simply, so, how do we stay? Have you ever found a love like this? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more stories like this one.